I may pipe in every so often, but for the most part, Laurel did most of the work and did it over the course of, I guess, a decade and a half, right? So um, she is qualified to not only elaborate on what we talked about in the course, but to give you some perspective on things that you can be doing. So Laurel, if you would just introduce a little bit of just kind of your time frame, and then
Mhm.
I'm going to go ahead and go with the first question that I have here.
Okay. In regards to time frame, I started homeschooling our daughters in 2000, the year 2000. Our older daughter was 4 at the time, and we wrapped up the journey in 2014 with our younger daughter. She just texted me. I think that's the year we finished with her. They both finished their K-12 journey or pre-K-12 journey in less than the 12 years, first through 12th. They both graduated early. One graduated a year early. The older daughter graduated a year early. The younger daughter graduated 2 years early. And in that time, we were able to, in speaking specifically about the high school years, we looked at what the requirements were for a high school diploma in our state, and we then adjusted our homeschool program accordingly. The girls said that they wanted to, if at all possible, graduate early, and they had been diligent students all along and knew how to proactively, without a lot of input from me, go ahead and get their work done. So they were able to fulfill all of the requirements for a high school diploma in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, before I even get into the question, I know that this was something that you worked at, and you mentioned the fact that they were proactive. Were there things that you did uh, specifically, unspecifically, that you encouraged them to be proactive? 'Cause this was something that kind of helped them to get through the process.
Well, we had the advantage of homeschooling from the very beginning. Our older daughter was 4, so we started with her with K4, and the girls are 2 years apart. So the following year, the younger daughter did not want to be left out, so we did a nursery 3 program with her. So she started at 3, and the older daughter started at 4. And so from the very beginning, we had been, whether directly or indirectly, working towards independent students and independent learners. They did not have the um, they were not involved in a traditional school setting, so quite honestly, they did not know to be anything but self-motivated, self-driven, independent students and thinkers. And so for that reason, when it came time to do high school, they were more than willing to just do whatever it took to fulfill the requirements, and not just for the sake of checking off boxes as much as they really did embrace the learning process. And I remember the writing was something that they really uh, advanced in terms of their learning during those years, and really to learning to write good, almost college level papers at that point. I think they were pretty lengthy and involved research, and I know we will talk about college in a bit, but when they got to college, they were more than prepared for what they encountered when they got there.
Right. Yep. That's a good segue. There's a question here about college. Now, as just as an aside, maybe you want to tell people, kind of where they are in their journey, and then talk about maybe some things that you did from the beginning, whether you knew they were going to go to college or not, how they got there, with homeschooling.
When we homeschooled them, we were not certain whether or not they would go to college, to be honest. And even at that point, we were beginning to question the value of a college degree, especially if the student was still kind of wondering what it is that they were going to end up doing, quote unquote, when they grew up. And So in regards to preparation for college, we were not necessarily looking at anything specifically college preparatory in nature, but they did end up going to college. And what I will say that if you are certain, you and your student are certain that they will be going to college, that you can begin to look at that proactively in high school. And you can look at, on the days that I homeschooled the girls some years ago, we looked at local, we could have looked at local community colleges because many of them do have reciprocity type relationships with homeschoolers where you can do coursework for not only high school credits but for college credits as well. So, a number of their homeschool peers went to college with college credit already in their back pocket. So again, if you're in the high school years, you know that college is a definite, then you can begin to prepare at that point. Now for us, as I mentioned earlier, we were not gearing them towards college as much as just a general preparedness for adulthood. And we encouraged them to even take time after graduation from high school to really explore what they felt they were equipped to do, what they were interested in doing, were Christians, what they felt like God was calling them to do. And so even though they did graduate early, they did not rush into college. They did not rush into any particular type of career. But we certainly had that option if that's something that we had wanted to do.
So you think they fared better as a result of homeschooling? Do you think that it prepared them in some way? And obviously, I know the answer to this, but I want you to kind of elaborate on this with that question of college.
I believe that homeschooling did indeed really prepare them and prepare them well for college. And one indication was the fact that when they got there, they had been offered nearly full tuition scholarships, both of them. And when they did arrive there and began to, matriculate and be students and get into coursework, they were actually a little surprised at the mentality of their classmates who, in their estimation, were, somewhat complaintive, not really motivated to do the work. And they had not encountered that prior to college, so they were able to continue the level of scholarship that had been established in the homeschooling years. They both graduated from college with some cum laude designation. I really don't even remember which one, but probably magna. And they were, in that regard, definitely homeschooling did serve them well. And the younger daughter who went into education reassured us, having been through the training involved for a teacher in teaching, children in regular school settings, that she is certain that homeschooling was the right answer for both her and her sister, not only given the way they learn and how it benefited them, but just what they were able to glean from that entire experience.
Yep, yep. And that's actually a good time to kind of cut away to the subject of socialization, because obviously this is a concern of a lot of people when they get ready to make a decision about whether or not they're going to be homeschooling. They're thinking, well, I'm going to be at home. My kid's not going to be with the other kids. How are they going to fare with things like socialization, and how are they going to come out?
Socialization is such a loaded issue or question, particularly amongst critics of homeschoolers and skeptics of homeschoolers. And what they believe is that a child who is not in a traditional school setting does not have exposure to the outside world, which is, of course, ludicrous. They're simply, during the learning process, spending most of their time with their family, perhaps other homeschoolers, depending on how you as a family might choose to homeschool the children. But they had plenty of opportunities for socialization, and we were cognizant of the fact that when we would leave the house, if we'd go to the store, if we'd go to the bank, if we go to, transact business, those types of things. And I was very mindful throughout the process of making sure I provided them with quality interactions. And what I mean by that is I would very purposely expose them to, they were children, to seniors. I would expose them to adults, to other children. So they did some of those children type activities, like they both studied piano. In the early years, they were in dance, and we were part of more casual homeschool groups that would get together for science projects or for physical activity type projects, activities, or uh, just, groups of that nature. And so they always, always, always had the opportunity to be involved with people of all age groups. And that was really important to us because even more than their peers who had been so-called socialized, they were able to interact with individuals of all ages, male, female, all races, all, socioeconomic, however you might want to, categorize people. They were able to talk to anyone and everyone, and they noted, I didn't even have to point it out to them, they noted that their age peers were less likely to do that if they had been in traditional school settings. And we remained active in church for all those years that they were living at home. And so they also had those interactions. And I was a part of service. I made sure that I involved them in service organizations and service activities. And they had, they had the social interactions with those groups as well. So in terms of socialization, if I could just reassure anyone entering homeschooling that their kids will always have opportunities for socialization, I would definitely want to do that. And by not having our children in a traditional school setting where they would be socialized by their peers, what people don't realize is the fact that a 5-year-old does not necessarily need for the majority of her socialization interactions to be with other 5-year-olds. It helps if she's socialized with, if she's socialized by not only young children as herself, but older children, teenagers, adults, older adults. All of those interactions are as important as, if not more important than, the age segregated socialization that I think people think of when they think of the word socialization. So yeah, our girls got all sorts of socialization.
No, that's good. Now, I do want to talk about curriculum, and there's a question here about how you go about getting or choosing curriculum. And I think it might be instructive either before or after you answer the question to talk about how you went about deciding on curriculum.
Before you even begin to talk about curriculum, I think it's important that you really address the issue of why you want to homeschool. And as I mentioned, we are Christians, so I really believe that it was something that God called us as a family to do. We were not looking to do anything like this. But whether or not you're a Christian, whether or not you feel like there is that type of reason for homeschooling, I still encourage you to make sure you know why you are homeschooling, because not only does it help you determine the curriculum, but it also helps you to remain committed to the cause on those days when all you want to do is lock yourself in the closet and cry, because those days do come. And it's really important, all joking aside, to remember why you're on the journey of homeschooling. And so once I had really begun to look at the reasons why I wanted to homeschool, I then began to look at the different types of curricula that were out there that would meet that need. And what I discovered is that curricula that addressed what is known as the classical Christian approach to homeschooling is what met my needs. Because rather than teach my daughters specific subjects and specific bits and pieces of information, I wanted them to know how to learn so that whenever they encountered a topic in their lives, even well beyond the K-12 years, that they wanted to learn, that they would have been given the tools for learning in homeschooling. And so we worked on building, developing the tools for learning for our daughters so that as they were able to progress through homeschooling, as they got into those high school years that I mentioned earlier, they had the tools to be able to tackle whatever it is that they were wanting to learn. So in that manner, not only were they able to, successfully tackle the required topics and subjects and coursework, but they could even begin to explore some of those other things that they were interested in doing, and that has definitely served them well. So as I said, we settled on the classical homeschooling approach for the reason of them being able to know how to learn on their own independently and to have those tools. And also, there's something else I wanted to say, that it enabled them to think critically. And in that regard, I think that they do a better job even than me. I'm a student again. They're able to really approach a topic and think critically about it. And that is something, again, I'm not certain that they might have gotten had they been in a traditional school setting. And certainly none of this is a slam on anyone whose children are in a traditional school setting. I want to make that clear. We're simply looking at the benefits and the value of homeschooling.
I think we have time for 2 more questions, Laurel. So I'm going to go to one about, we talk about how you teach the advanced subjects. I do also want to touch on, there's one here about virtual charter schools, and then I guess we'll finish up with maybe some resources you might suggest for somebody who's just getting started and they're trying to figure out if they want to do it. But first, let's talk about how you teach an advanced subject, because they did calculus and some other stuff. So how do you go about that?
In regards to those advanced subjects, I think that that's probably something that intimidates some people out of homeschooling. They're able to talk themselves out of doing it. And what I would say is that there are so many resources available now that your child can tackle those advanced topics without you ever learning them. So for example, our daughters learn Latin, and I never learned Latin. I was able to find a curriculum that would teach them Latin for me. So there's always that option. And now it's a different era. It is not only are we 8 years beyond my younger child graduating, but we're also in a post-COVID era, and that totally warrants its own conversation as to how the face of homeschooling has changed since before the pandemic and now on the other side of the pandemic. But at least for our experience, I was able to, when they were around middle school, maybe in the middle school years, is when we began to look at Latin, and I was able to purchase a curriculum through our classical curriculum provider that taught the girls Latin. And that goes for, let's see, logic is another course. They learned logic and rhetoric, and they did that without me directly being their instructor. So in the years that we did it, that would have looked like a CD or DVD. I'm certain now you can get something streaming as probably you can even find an online course with a live instructor delivering the content synchronously or maybe even asynchronously being that you're not doing it live in person. So maybe you can access videos and resources that way. But synchronous means it's a live interaction. You can interact with the instructor in the moment. And So there are definitely resources out there for that. And I think that having mentioned online resources, maybe it's a good time to talk about virtual charter schools, because some parents opt for the virtual charter school process.
Yep.
And the advantage of virtual charter schools is that it's essentially public school. Well, there might be some that are, obviously, there would be some that are not, but virtual charter schools are public schools, so you don't have to pay for them. And not only do you not have to pay for tuition, you don't have to pay for, unless things have changed since my girls were homeschooled, you don't have to pay for the computer, the books, the resources, if you're doing arts and crafts, you don't have to pay for the materials for that. Whatever it is that you might need, you are sent everything free of charge. And you are also given a curriculum, and you use that curriculum as it's written, and you are required to account for, I think it's 180 days of SEAT work, SEAT work, and you are logging the days and the hours that you spend doing school. So the obvious advantage is not only is it free, but someone else is figuring everything out for you. And you basically open a box, you plug in a computer, you follow the instructions that are in front of you. It sounds great, and in many ways it is. However, the reality is, and this is I'm speaking from the experience of my friends who chose the virtual charter school route, it is intense. It is too much. It is an attempt to replicate school at home, and that's not exactly what homeschooling is. I can address that in a moment if we have the time, but the point of homeschooling is to provide your child or your children with an educational experience that does not necessarily have to look like the one in school. That's a specific environment created to handle 1, 2, 3 dozen kids at a time, all with their own unique learning abilities, all in their own place in the curriculum, and what they've encountered in their learning process so far, and one person attempting to manage and corral all of it. That's a different learning experience than what you and your 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or however many kids you have, children at home, are attempting to navigate. And so with the virtual charter school process, the disadvantages are, another disadvantage was that, for example, if we had, determined the learning and the coursework we were going to do for a day, if we finished in 2 or 3 hours, and that was very common to finish in a lot less time than those in a traditional school setting would have taken to do the same amount of work, it did not matter, because with a virtual charter school, you still had not only seat days, but I believe you had seat time, where you had to account for a certain number of hours during the day. And so the nature of some of the work was, and again, this is according to what my friends who homeschooled told me, some of it was simply busy work or seat work. And again, if you're homeschooling, you don't have to have your child do busy work while the rest of the class catches up. Your child can move at their own pace. Now, if you need to stop and spend more time on a topic, homeschooling does provide that. But if the child understands the information that they're being taught, there's no reason to dwell there unnecessarily. You can just move at their pace. And that is certainly an advantage of homeschooling. Our daughters moved at their own pace, and we still met all the requirements for not only the high school diplomas that they both earned, but even in the elementary school years when we were responsible for providing portfolios. And again, that is a state requirement. You will have to check with your own state to know what their requirements are. We were able to still accomplish everything we needed to accomplish, and then some. They did plenty of outside things, having already filled the requirements of the necessary things. So I just wanted to make sure that we made the distinction between what homeschooling actually is as opposed to bringing school home. And during the pandemic, we did see a lot of that. Teachers were scrambling to, bless their hearts, provide a learning experience for their students in a way that they had never been trained to do so. And so they were attempting to replicate school at home. And the results are in. If you've talked to anyone that you know that's a teacher, or if you yourself are a teacher, you know that teachers are chalking those 2.5 years up as a loss. And my friend who teaches, I think it's I forget it must be like second, third, fourth, fifth grade, somewhere around there. The years that a child spends in school learning to read were lost. So she has children that should have learned to read years ago, during that time, and she's having to teach basic reading skills at a time when she should be able to be building on those reading skills. And so it's a different environment, the two of them. And so just so you understand that there's not really a connection between homeschooling in its truest sense, you lead the learning as the parent, and a virtual charter school, which is the school district or the school leads the learning and what happens and how it happens.
Right. Oh, that's good. We're pretty much at the end. I know that there were two books that for me helped me to make the decision, and I can remember those books years ago. One, they were both by Grace Llewellyn. One was called The Teenage Liberation Handbook, even though our kids were not teenagers at that point. And another one for me personally, I think was called Freedom Challenge. And that was specifically about, African American homeschoolers. Can you remember any books that you read that you can recommend to people? And I would recommend people, I guess, Freedom Challenge. I would also recommend Teenage Liberation Handbook, and maybe you have some you can recommend too.
Tools that I found helpful for me were, I read an essay written by Dorothy Sayers some years ago called The Lost Tools of Learning, and that was, for me, instrumental in getting started on the journey and how we got started on the journey. Dorothy Sayers was the one who introduced the notion of, as opposed to teaching a child specific subjects, teach the child how to learn, and then you have a lifelong learner that is not dependent upon a school district or the person standing at the front of the room to drive the learning. And as a follow-up to that, because she wrote that, she was either on staff it was either Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge in the 40s, I think it was. In more recent years, there is a book written by Douglas Wilson called Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, and he builds on the essay that Dorothy Sayers wrote. Another book that I found very helpful was The Well-Trained Mind by, excuse me, it was a mother and daughter team. Susan Wise Bauer is the daughter. I forget the mom's name. Her last name, of course, is Wise, but the book was called The Well-Trained Mind. And that book kind of further reinforced for me the nature of how I wanted to go about homeschooling and the learning process that I wanted our children to have. So those were helpful. And the family name is Blue Dorn. They also wrote some helpful books. Theirs were geared specifically towards classical Christian, but that was meaningful for me. And, I've not done this. I've been out of the game for 8 years, so I don't know what's out there in recent years, but I know that those books were very helpful for me.
All right, we'll put some links together with those books and send it out to people. And so that it's been about 30 minutes, and I said that I hold you all on here for 30 minutes. So Laurel, thank you, and I'm sure that this is going to be helpful for people who are trying to make a decision about homeschooling. So unless you have any final words, we will check out.
All righty. Have a good evening, and thanks for coming.
All right, bye-bye.